Hello, welcome to the Growing Place Community Garden in Hurst, Texas. My name's Chuck Lucas and I'm one of the volunteers here at the garden. I'll be talking to you today about our composting operation, which is mainly where I volunteer. We started the garden in 2017, had our grand opening in spring of 2018, so we're starting our third year here at the garden. We're currently at 24 raised beds. Before we get started, let me give you a tour of the garden. At the entrance to our garden, we have two small beds we just put in. They have milkweed in it, native milkweed. We're trying to get certified as a monarch way station. The raised beds are built out of cedar. The gardeners pay $50 a year to rent the plot, and then we provide all the fertilizer, pest control products, water, compost, mulch, etc. We do ask that they donate 50% of their produce to the local food bank, which many of them are happy to do, and actually many of them donate more than that. We weren't exactly sure how the demand would be for the garden when we started, but we're at 24 beds. We currently have 12 people on the waiting list, so we're trying to decide whether to build additional beds or not. Here's our garden shed, and then back behind there you can see the composting area. You need to have water to your composting area, so we're able to run a hose from the spigot on back to our composting bins. There are many benefits to composting. However, the main one, in my opinion, is improving your soil. The best thing we can do to help our gardeners have a successful outcome is to make sure our garden has good soil in it. And composting is probably the easiest and the cheapest way to improve the soil. There's an old saying about soil, and it really holds true today. We need to pay attention to the soil, give it as much care and tending as we do to growing our plants, fertilizing, watering, weeding, etc. This is a soil test for our last batch of soil that we got from Silver Creek Materials. They're a great company to work with. They really support the community gardens, and I'd recommend if you ever need any materials, think of them. As you can see, it's great soil, good nitrogen content, potassium and magnesium, etc. The pH is a little high, as most Texas soils are. And the organic matter isn't bad at almost 4%. I like to see it a little higher. But compost is going to be the easiest way to address these two matters. It will increase your organic matter, and it will bring your pH down. Plants like to live in that 6 to 7% pH range, and the addition of compost over time will slowly work your pH down into this area. Another benefit of using compost in your garden is in the area of watering and water conservation. One of the hardest things for new gardeners to learn is how to properly water vegetables, especially in a raised bed and in the Texas heat. The organic matter that compost will add to your soil will hold water. Think of it as like a sponge. It will help even out the highs and lows if they overwater or underwater. This is just some research that supports that concept of composting, allowing your soil to hold additional water that will be available to the plant. This is an area that was really quite unexpected when we started composting, and that's the need in the community. As I went around and was involved in talks on getting my hours, volunteer hours for Master Composting, I saw a lot of people who lived in an apartment or they were single or just two people in a house and they really didn't have the quantity that it is really needed to get composting going easy. And so they really weren't able to compost. Sure, you can recommend worm composting for apartment dwellers, but not very many people are going to take you up on that. So, uh, what we did was we started noticing an interest in options for dropping off food waste. We actually had some questions on our website asking if we accepted material for composting. So here you can see the individual, the amount that they have is quite small, but yet a community garden, we can combine all these small amounts and large amounts that we get from other sources, and we can really get a good composting operation going. It's just like pooling knowledge in a community garden. Well, we pool our food waste and we're able to compost a lot easier. Another area that sparked interest in composting is there are many organizations that are looking for volunteer opportunities. This happens to be a picture of a church group that wanted to do some volunteer work, and we put them to work in the composting area. Companies, they want to have team building, community service, etc. You can always bring them in. There's always compost to be turned, even if there's not something in the garden at that time of year they can do. Students need service hours. There's always the compost there. This is an aerial view of our setup, our community garden, and down south where the yellow circle is, underneath the trees is our composting area. Now, if you look, we're surrounded by houses, so we really try to keep the area clean so that we don't get any complaints from the neighbors. And actually, not too long ago, a code enforcement officer, one of the new people with the city, showed up at our lot and looked around. And so we were really glad that we sort of kept it up. So if you have a composting area, remember you want to try to be a good neighbor, try to do it right and keep it clean. We located underneath the trees, and we'll talk about that a little later, but that's an area that you really can't use for growing vegetables. It just doesn't have the sunlight, but it's perfect for composting. I'm going to take a second to talk about the importance of social media. This happens to be a shot of our garden website that we developed, but it's important to have some sort of social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or a website, something where people know that you're serious and you're a going concern. It helps attract opportunities for you, whether it be grants or people that want to work with you and so forth. So the website, we developed that early on. Another thing that we sort of stumbled into was we made sure that our community garden was on a Google business. And that actually got a lot of traffic driven from a Google search to our website. I believe it's actually how we connected with the company we currently partner with for our composting material, Turn Compost. On the Google business website, the public can leave questions, and that's where we've got our first inquiries about can people drop off material for composting. They also send you a monthly statistical analysis of how many people found your business, how many people Googled community gardens, and so forth. This is also how this company came to us, a company called Small X Peppers. Now, this has nothing to do with composting, but I want to throw it out there because it's what happens once you get a presence in social media. This is a small company that likes to help community gardens across America. They reached out to us, asked if we would be willing to grow peppers, and they would buy them for $2.50 a pound, or would give us a bottle of hot sauce for a pound of peppers that we could then sell to raise funds to support our garden, to buy fertilizers and pest control products and so forth. In the back of the garden behind our garden shed, we have our composting area. You need to have water nearby, so we have a hose hooked up that we can run back to our composting bins. We intentionally put it under the trees because in the summertime, water conservation and watering the compost piles, we wanted to be able to keep them as moist as possible and eliminate as much evaporation as we could. We have the ability to run several bins. This happens to be our finished bin down here, about ready to be sifted. We store them in the back in this storage area. This was an Eagle Scout project. Scout built it for us about a year ago. We store mulch off to the left, compost, finished compost, and dirt. And over here we have a storage bin for our browns or our leaves. We run them over with a lawnmower and put them in there. As you can see, our garden happens to be located on a treed lot, so we're able to have access to plenty of leaves. If we run short of leaves, we have some straw that a local supermarket donated to us. We can chop that up and use it as a carbon in our piles also. Here, one of our gardeners that works at Starbucks has dropped off some grounds. And here you can see a bin filled with some tomato plants that have just been pulled out of somebody's plot. Well, how do we get started? Well, the first thing that's helpful is if you have somebody who knows something about composting. And a Master Composter is really the easiest way to do that. I got my training through the Master Composter classes at Fort Worth, and the other volunteer that works with me, he got his training at the same area. Neither of us knew much about composting. We took the training, and now we just started working in our own garden and volunteered in other areas to get our volunteer hours. So we learned a lot from watching other people. Most of the training that's available right now is in the process of transitioning to online training. So there may not be any in-person classes, but shortly you'll start to see this online training available through various sources. Now, you don't have to have formal training. You can always go get the books if you want. This happens to be the book that was given to us for our Master Composter training, the Rodale Book of Composting. This has everything, probably even more than you'd want to know about composting, but it's a great resource, and you can find it used online, and or you can order it new. The other thing is just Google composting. There are a lot of great websites, a lot of great videos, and a lot of the agricultural services. Texas A&M AgriLife is a great source. So you can actually educate yourself. And if you have run into a problem, you can go to the internet. Somebody else has probably already had the problem also. Now we need to get the materials to compost. Now this was actually one of the harder things we had when we started our garden. I thought building the garden and getting the gardeners would be hard, and that it'd be no problem getting spoiled food. But it was kind of the opposite way. Everything else came to us, but we had a hard time finding materials. So I'm not going to get into all the details about composting, but basically you need to have carbons, which are nicknamed browns, and nitrogens, which are nicknamed greens. So leaves are pretty safe as a brown. People normally don't use insecticides on trees and so forth. So community members might bring their leaves in, bag them up, hopefully in paper bags, uh, drop them off, and you can use them to mix in with your um, composting materials. A lawn service might also have leaves during certain times of the year. We got several bales of straw from Market Street that was in a display period that they said, hey, do you want this? And we can use that. The problem is you have to sort of know whether it's straw or hay. Straw is a great source of carbon, but hay is a nitrogen and could introduce a bunch of weeds and hay into your garden. Now the greens are kind of the hard. So I'm going to list, you see listed here, several sources of possible greens. Tarrant Area Food Bank has mobile food pantries that are around the city at certain days of the month, and sometimes those or people that manage those will give you the spoiled or damaged produce. Grocery stores, if you can make a connection there. One of the gardens has a connection with a goat farm, organic goat farm, and they get goat manure, which is great for composting. It's a great source of nitrogen. Restaurants, sometimes there are restaurants that are happy to give you their food waste. Then there are companies like Turn Compost that actually are people pay to compost their food waste, and they need to get rid of that food waste somewhere. Residents that are interested in composting can bring their food waste down to your lot. And then your garden plots, of course, generate a lot of greens. The tomatoes when they come out, the okra plants when they come out, the potatoes that plants, the vines, um, they'll all be sources that can go into your composting pile. Our personal experience was we started out with coffee grounds from Starbucks, and we were able to make a connection with some of the produce people at Market Street, and they would call us up from time to time. Hey, I've got corn husks, I've got some spoiled kale, etc. That was the amounts were kind of small, and we couldn't really depend on exactly when it was going to be. We kept looking for more. Then we stumbled across Tarrant Area Food Bank, one of the local mobile pantries near us, and sometimes we got a ton of food that was damaged or spoiled from them, and other times there wasn't anything. So it was real hit and miss. It was a once a month thing. We would go down there and collect it. Eventually, Turn Compost in the community garden connected, and that was a great setup. They bring the buckets to us, and we have some local individuals that bring their compost to us also. So the compost is actually coming to us now, and that's been real useful. When you accept drop-offs, I would say be cautious. Get set up first. Having experience with trying to start recycling, there's a pretty steep educational curve. So we had this sign made that is posted near our compost drop-off place. It's just to remind people what can be composted and what should not be put in there. And this is a infographic from takecareoftexas.org. They sent us the vector file. We gave it to a sign maker. He was able to blow it up, put it on a sign for us. Nearby the bin for the composting materials, we also have a bin that has straw and leaves and so forth, so that if people come on their own, drop something off, they're able to cover it up with leaves and straw to kind of keep the bugs away and everything. So partnering with Turn Compost has really helped out our composting operation. Each Sunday, they drop off, on average, about 20 buckets of food waste. Then during the week, we work them into the compost bin, clean the buckets, and next Sunday, they pick up the clean buckets and drop off the filled buckets. So year to date, we've diverted about 5,400 pounds of food waste from the landfill into our composting operation. We have 2 master composters who do the main work in the compost area. Other gardens have weekly community jobs where the gardeners themselves rotate through turning the compost piles, but we mainly use our master composters, and then when we have volunteers who want to work in the garden. Now, you need something to put the compost in. Well, it's great if you have a bin, and you want to have a bin that's about a cubic yard and you can make it circular. But you can buy a commercial bin. You can make your own. The ones on the left are ones we happen to make on our own out of a fencing material. You can make them round, whatever. Or you don't have to really have a bin. You can have a pile, as you can see in the middle. That is just a pile where all the organic material goes into. It's tossed from time to time. It takes a little longer to compost, but you're totally able to make compost that way. It kind of depends on what your particular situation is, how much compost you're trying to generate, and so forth. Now, how much compost? Well, one of those cubic yard bins, 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot, will compost down and yield 1.5 inches of compost by a 4 by 16 plot. So for every bin, we're able to give each of our plots 1.5 inches of compost. And that's sort of a goal we aim for, 1 to 2 inches of compost spread across the top and worked lightly into the soil each year. We kind of have to ration it. If we had more, we might be able to give people more. The compost does shrink down by about 70%, so you're going to end up with about a quarter of a bin by the time it's all finished. Storage, we happen to have these bins that are great. They were an Eagle Scout project. They're easy to make. They're made out of pallets, and we were very fortunate to have these made for us. We did ask the Scout to build a cover over our finished compost. It just keeps it a little cleaner. But you can also have it in just a pile.
Another thing you'll notice if you decide to set up a composting operation is that area will become alive with a lot of interesting wildlife, birds, insects, etc. There are worms and all kinds of little bugs to eat in those compost piles, and it really attracts uh, interesting wildlife. Ours being under the shade, it's a little cooler back there. It's sort of like an oasis in the garden.
So just to summarize a little bit, the benefits are you can save on the landfill. Uh, we just are running out of landfill, and if you can divert the food away from the landfill, that's great. It also you will help support a local interest in composting, which a lot of people are starting to think about these days. Some of the cities are actually starting composting programs. And then the big benefit, I think, is you improve your soil. When I was first helping to start the community garden, one of the master gardeners somewhere said, You can't buy soil like this. This is great soil. And that has been our goal. We want to have the best soil and offer it to our gardeners so that they hopefully will have success in the garden. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope that if you decide to start a composting operation in your garden, I wish you all the success, and I think you'll find it's a it's a great opportunity to open up another aspect of your community garden. Thank you.